This is not a war. The war is fought differently.
And so let me ask you this question. Let's say that Mertz makes good on his threat and he shoots some missiles and they actually hit something important inside Russia, and Russia says, all right, that's it. You're a direct participant, and bam, all of a sudden we're fighting. If the next day Putin says, all right, now we're at war, what would be different?
There is such thing which is called the reserve capacity. That is why it's very classified thing. For example, if you look at the Ural Vagon Zavod, famous, the plant which produces Russian tanks, for example, they do not allow you there, for example, only on the specific areas, because if you look attentively at the area of this plant, there are some capacities which are reserved. You do not need to go there. You're already producing enough, so they will be immediately employed. And then, of course, there will be routing resources, for example, for the new force to be raised, which will be, as I already stated, immediate reserve, which will be called upon as 2.5 million people. Then you have to dress them, then you uniform them, you have to give them weapons, you have to train them. Many of them are already trained, generally, speaking.
They have to be updated.
Yeah, so then suddenly you have this whole thing, and you have to launch the production, which you have the reserve capacity there. You go to the full capacity, and that, of course, will require the hiring of the new labor force. It will require some limitations on there, not only just because once you go by the constitution and by military doctrine of Russia into full-blown war, you will have no shopping malls that easily. There will be some limitation on the issue of the liberties. For example, there will be serious restriction on the operation of the media, for example, which is absolutely natural for when you deal with that type of war. And essentially, after that, the whole head of NATO will be wiped out within the 72 to whatever hours, and then you have essentially the war, and Brussels will not be standing there.
And so let me ask you this. So because the manpower exists already, they have to mobilize. I mean, you could probably literally within a couple of 2 or 3 months actually get them to show up, maybe not even that long. But in terms of getting the reserve capacity activated and all the resources flowing in or whatever, that would take a considerable amount of time. 9 months, a year, how long would it take to get to full production to where you could actually employ that many troops and have ammunition and everything else for them to use?
Well, I would say that will be my estimate, because I only know that it does exist, but how far it will go, probably within the I would say 3-4 months, about that, to really fire it up completely, that it begins to produce everything what you need. And then just to give you example, they may retool number of the aerospace manufacturing hubs in Russia, such as which are producing like Komsomolsk-on-Amur, famous plant, and which produces actually Su-57s, but they also produce Sukhoi superjets. Okay. And those plants which were producing the MS-21, which are Russia has 30 hulls of the already of those aircraft, commercial aircraft, being ready to roll out and being stuck with the new Russian PD-14 engines and things of this nature. Then suddenly you stop this production, but you can retool it pretty fast. And then suddenly you have the capacity to produce the combat aircraft grow by considerable margin, probably 2-3-fold at least. And so you look attentively at those things. Yes, this is what will happen then. And then after that, we have the completely new approach towards the state. What will happen? State will employ, as it was happening during the Desert Storm. What did the United States do? They said, okay, commercial airliners, come here, buddies. Okay, you are now flying for us. You're not flying for your, and so what they started to loading troops and ship them to Middle East. Well, the same thing is going to happen there.
Okay, so it says, yeah, I actually remember I was on some of those jets myself. Let's say that it takes longer than, let's say it takes double the time longer, and especially when you're talking about having then to bring like large number, hundreds of thousands, probably more people into doing jobs they weren't doing before. They've got to be trained, et cetera. Then you have to get all the natural resources. Things get fired up. Things didn't work. They have to break, whatever. Let's say that it takes 9 months or a year even before it's like at full capacity and cranking stuff out. How long do you think it would take the West at large, writ large, all of Western Europe, to get to that same level if they started from scratch?
Oh, no, they cannot get there. That's the problem. You need to have resources to do that. You need to have energy. Yes, that oil, that gas. You need to have electric capacity to do this. You need to have materials. Europe doesn't have those resources. They don't have rare earth metals. They don't have actually metals per se, that much. So, and in terms when you look at capacity of the European part of NATO, they cannot do that. And probably if, let's say, they mobilize completely, they turn themselves, which they are going there totally in the totalitarian concentration camp. And they literally give people, this 1984 type, portions of, 25 gram of chocolate and things like that. Maybe they will be able to do something by reducing labor cost to the point that it's basically slave labor. But other than that, they cannot do that. And here comes the other thing. And this is what people have to understand. They're not going to understand this in the economic history, whatever departments of the, Ivy League. They just simply have no toolkit or all those PhDs. That technologically, Europe is not even in the same league. As much as the United States lost their arms race. But Europe, it's like fighting sailboats with the when you have the dreadnought, those armored ships, battleships, fighting with their main, guns, fighting the, broadsides of the wooden ships. That's what it is. So it's compounded. It is a synergy of the black situations, essentially. When the synergy being, of course, that the sum is larger than the sum of the constituent parts. The result is larger than that. And this is what we have. And that is why Russians react. They say things, they need to react to some, what's the name of Mertz announcements, for example. Many people do not recognize that actually they probably can produce about 25 to maybe 50 at best a year of those outdated, they are obsolete Taurus missiles. Many people are sold all those pictures, they see something exploding. They do not understand the scale of things. When you explain to them, guys, do you understand that the length of the front on the straight line in the special military operation is 1,200 kilometers? Well, you consider all curves and things of this nature, it runs at about 2,000 kilometers. We're looking at 1,200 miles. And people say, oh, yeah, so what's the big deal? It's a huge deal. And that's, if you read for preface to my latest book, it starts with the fact it's only the real war which completely demonstrates the real military, scientific, industrial capacity of the country. You cannot do it on some, fly-in bomb like Houthis or things like that. No, you have to be able not only to sustain it, but increase the what is called effort. This is the operational term. It's not some kind of the, increasing of the effort. So, and Russia can sustain this for years. Many years.
Well, in fact, I want to jump to a clip here from President Putin himself, who just a few days ago was addressing business leaders in Moscow, was talking about just the Russian economy generally, but also tied it together with the special military operation.
The fact that Russia's economy is now the fourth largest in the world by purchasing power parity is, of course, your direct merit, the result of the collective work of enterprises and companies from all regions of the Russian Federation. I have already mentioned this figure and want to reiterate it. Over the past 2 years, under far from ideal and in fact very difficult conditions, Russia's economy has grown at an accelerated pace. As you know, the year before last, growth was 4.1%. and last year 4.3%, a good indicator. The past few years have presented Russia and our business community with a number of acute challenges. The entrepreneurial community has faced a series of trials. They were related to changes in logistics and supply chains, disruptions to previously established payment mechanisms and international settlements. Moreover, a number of foreign companies left the Russian market largely under pressure from the so-called Western political elites. Unfortunately, some of them, though this is an obvious fact, let down their Russian partners. What is very important is that under these difficult conditions, our entrepreneurs did not falter, did not give up, but on the contrary, demonstrated their inherent business acumen, resourcefulness, and thorough economic pragmatism in the broadest and most direct sense of the word.
So, of course, what jumps out at me there is that in the last 2 years, Russia's had, I think, 4.1 to 4.3% economic growth. In the last year, the European Union as a whole, 1% economic growth. So it seems odd to me that we want to be talking about how we're going to collapse the Russian economy with sanctions when all the sanctions have seemed to, I don't know if they strengthened the Russian economy or not, but that was the net result.
Yeah, it's strengthening it. Just to give you an example. And believe me, I worked already in a commercial aerospace industry in the United States. Already by 2015, Boeing was actually, not only Boeing, Airbus too, and I know it's insider information at that time. They were already shaking in their boots, for example, from the hearing this abbreviation, MS-21, which was Russian single aisle competitor to 737. It's 737 is not even competitor, and Airbus 321. Russians finally completely Russified it. Before that, there was a black wing which was made on the composite materials provided by the United States and European Union and even Japan. They stopped it. Well, guess what? Many people still don't understand. Russians simply built the new composite materials industry. Not from the scratch, but essentially from, I don't know, 10% up to 100%. And now it is fully Russified. It flies on Russian engines, PD-14, and commercial engine, state-of-the-art commercial engine. It's a whole different level of expertise. Then you have the Sukhoi Superjet, which is going to be called Yakovlev together with MS-21. It's now flies on PD-8, Russian engine completely. So everything is Russified. They thought the idea, because they are ignorant, and I'm telling you they are ignorant. It's not like I assume, I'm stating this, they are ignorant. They thought that because they would draw some kind of the or break supply chains which have been provided by the West, that Russia economy will collapse. Evidently, what the problem is, they didn't understand that the Russians were already hard working towards that. And here is surprise, surprise, from 2008. Russia was preparing for this. From 2014, after Crimea and the Maidan in Ukraine, the process accelerated dramatically. But you cannot tell this to Mr. Bessenet or whatever, there's some PhD in economics from Harvard. They wouldn't understand it. They have no tools. And when you have clowns like Michael McFaul, who passes for Russia scholar, and I mean, do you know what American intelligence agent does first when he gets to Russia to get his information from? He gets to people who read Независимая газета. He finds the first liberal outlet, pro-Western outlet, which subsists on the, which is now, they are finally being called what they are, foreign agents. And they talk to these people. And guess what those people do then? They tell them exactly what they want to hear. And that's what it is. It's nothing. You cannot change this. Now add here some, not all, but some people with the arrogance and, thinking that they're the best thing ever. And when they hear this, they melt. They say, yeah, Russians are about to collapse. Well, they never studied history. They never studied economics. They never studied real war. And as a result, each time it's like surprise, surprise, surprise. And how about you start studying, the thing which I was writing now into second decade. The whole idea was to warn. If you look attentively at my December 2014 post, this is where one of the first posts in my blog, where I stated very clearly, I can quote it, quote is in there, it never has been changed, that by engaging into this, they didn't understand what they were getting themselves into. People much tougher than the United States, I'm talking about Nazi Europe essentially combined, tried to do this to Russians. They failed. And they are told that by engaging into change of regime change, by on the advice of all those supposedly neocons like Victoria Nuland and all people of this scale, they lost the war. They just didn't know.
And I want to jump in on that point right there, because you're talking about Victoria Nuland and what happened in 2014 and just what was going on in the United States from the end of the Cold War forward, and was really starting to drive it home there that we thought we're going to put Russia in a box by continuing to push NATO right up to the corner. I want to play a soundbite here from Sergei Lavrov, I believe it was earlier today, where he was talking about here is the reason why we started this and why the reason we will finish it on terms that we will live with.
I have stated many times that a trigger to the Ukrainian conflict and in fact to the profound crisis of European security has been the many years of eastward expansion of NATO. Something that happened in contrast to the promises of Europeans and Americans given to Russia that NATO will not expand to the east. When we tried to confront our European colleagues with that, telling them that they were violating something that their leaders had signed, the response was, oh, it was just a political declaration, and legal rights will only be given to those countries that apply for NATO membership, which proves that that position was a lie to begin with. And certainly Russia had to respond to that, to act against it.
So the question is there anything Russia won't do to make sure that they secure their security based on that desire from NATO? How much of this is just Russia posturing?
Oh, there's no posturing. If NATO wants to fight a war over that, sure, Russians are ready. So the infrastructure was there already since a long time ago. And as I already stated, the preparation for the war started in earnest immediately after Maidan and understanding of the United States meddling in all that. So, and that's why Crimea came back, and that is why it was known that U.S. Navy was already surveying the other places in Crimea for the naval basing. So it's not a secret. And yeah, if it comes down to whatever, so sure, there will be war. There will be war, and NATO will be defeated and annihilated physically. So, and Russians are ready, and I am on record for so many years.
And let me ask you this question. And I think the answer is going to be self-evident, but I'd still like to hear you give your view of it. Is there any conditions, any scenario at all, to where if the West pulled just the right levers, that if the Russian economy collapsed, like say in the 1990s or something, so that version of a collapse, that Putin would say, oh, all right, you know what? Let's just pull in and we'll just hold on with what we got and we'll end the war here. Is there any scenario that would happen?
No, I don't see it. You know why? Because just before we went online, Mr. Naryshkin, chief of the Foreign Intelligence Services, went on record specifically on this conference, and he stated Russia cannot allow itself to be weak, period. And Russians know this. That's the whole thing. The consensus in Russian society, this is what also is not understood, is that 1990s cannot repeat again, and they will not, especially considering the fact the system which is now in place, and many people associate only Putin. I mean, people are really naive if they think that Vladimir Putin actually is the only one. In fact, Vladimir Putin is a reasonable one. There are many people who won't mind blowing the Berlin into smithereens, or, just if it comes down to it. And NATO will do nothing about it. They know, some people there, they understand now the correlation of forces and means. And this is precisely the reason that there will be no negotiations on any kind of I mean, there will be, as I already stated, Russians are probably second after Chinese in terms of their ability to pull their tomcat by gonads, in terms of diplomacy, talking things here and there, making statements. Reality is, it is only the ground which matters, period. As Zhou Enlai, the premier of China, in 1954 stated, which I love to quote, he correctly rephrased famous Clausewitzian dictum that Clausewitz stated that, war is the continuation of the policy by other means. Well, Zhou Enlai stated that diplomacy is continuation of the war by other means. In the end, essentially, the only thing which matters is what matters in the real economy, not service. When you provide some kind of HR distribution, and you pay money, and oh my God, we produced like, $100,000 in GDP. No, you didn't. You produced nothing, essentially. It's like famous analogy of the shoe shining. I shine your shoes, you give me $20. You shine my shoes, I'll give you $20. We produced $40 of GDP. No, we produced nothing. We just shined our shoes for free. But this is how the economy in the West works.
I hadn't heard that one. That was a good one.
That is absolutely. Those people do not understand. And when I give me anybody from Wall Street Journal, anybody, chief editor, well, they are going to be morons and ignoramuses. They know only narratives. But if I tell you that Russia produces more steel and iron than the United States, they will be like, what? I say, yeah, they do. And look up the data. But they don't look at this data. They look only at the balance
Narratives.
sheet.
Yeah.
And the only thing they know are money, how to make money out of thin air. And then suddenly, Russian aerospace, commercial aerospace was supposed to collapse. No, it is thriving, and they cannot produce now those PD-14s fast enough, because the first 30 fuselage, the first hulls of the MS-21 are already ready. They are standing there. You can look at them. They are ready to be, they have fully Russian electronics, fully Russian chips, but yeah, we know the joke about washing machines,
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, Russians already have it. It's became the famous meme by Russians.